further ado, I'd love to get this session started. And first off, thank our guest, Rebecca Minkoff, style icon, entrepreneur, and now author. So we are so excited to have her with us here today. Secondly, would love to thank all of our SoFi members and SoFi guests. We are so excited to have you, and we really appreciate you spending your Tuesday afternoon with us here. As promised, all of you who join live will receive a signed copy of Rebecca's new book. Right after this webinar, we'll be sending you more information, so don't worry about that. And lastly, would love to thank Lauren Anastasio, who will be here today. Lauren is a certified financial planner at SoFi and has been one of our financial spokespeople during the COVID time. So I'm sure many of you have seen her face here before. So Lauren, thank you so much for joining us as well, and would love to hand things over to you.
Thanks, Molly. I am so thrilled to be here. This is one of the events that I have been vastly anticipating over the last few months. And so super excited the time has finally come. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lauren Anastasio. I am one of SoFi's certified financial planners on our advice team. And though we offer many of these events for the purpose of education and financial guidance, as a reminder, though I am a certified financial planner, nothing that you hear today from myself, from Rebecca, or anyone else should be considered to be personalized financial advice. So as always, please, if you have questions that are of a financial nature and you want to act on those, always consult a professional before making those decisions. So with that disclosure, I would love to introduce the star of our session today. As Molly reminded all of you, not that you need this reminder, but Rebecca Minkoff is joining us. She is not only a world-renowned fashion designer, a philanthropist, and a mother, but now an author of my first summer reading book, Fearless, which we absolutely love here at SoFi because we're all about following our ambition. And I think that the term fearless really resonates with many of our members who consider themselves to be incredibly ambitious. So Rebecca had joined us, I guess, a little over a year ago at the beginning of COVID, and was speaking to us about adapting during that time. And I'm thrilled to introduce her again today and have the opportunity to catch up with her and see how things have been going. So Rebecca, thank you again for joining us. Oh, I think I have you muted.
Every time. I do it every time. I'm always like, I'm ready to go. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I'm so excited to see so many wonderful women tuning in from everywhere. Places that I love, New York, LA, Tampa. That's where I am right now. So welcome.
Awesome. So I know that a lot has changed for many of us since you last joined us early in 2020. Probably most noteworthy is your recent book launch. So many of our viewers today are likely aware that this has been published, now available, but would love to hear from you about what this last year has looked like for you and your decision to publish this book, how you came to decide on the title and the amazing pieces of information, basically these rules that you have shared with us.
Yeah, so I definitely didn't start the pandemic out with, let me write a book. That was, I had signed the book deal December of 2019 and had been working on it January to March, building out the infrastructure, the framework. I knew that I wanted to write a business book, not just because I've had 20 years of experience, but also tell it through my lens of the last 20 years of my life and all the misadventures I've had. And so when the pandemic hit, my company, which has been reported of being over $100 million in size, lost 70% of that revenue overnight. Literally every single one of our wholesale partners, wholesale meaning Nordstrom, Bloomingdale, Saks, Neiman Marcus, gone 70%. So you can do the math since you're all well-versed in finance. And what was left was just my website. And how do you survive as a brand on that? So spent March and April, along with what was left of our team, about half the team was left, and my brother, who's my co-founder, rebuilding my company. And so as I'm sitting here writing a book for how to be successful, I'm also rebuilding my company. And so while I would never say that the timing was good because no one needed what happened to happen, as I'm sitting there going, how do I do this? We're starting over. Um, I was able to go like, oh, I did this back then. Oh, I acted like this. And this is what so I was able to sort of really get clear on what I wanted to convey. And having road tested those rules a second time in my life, am able to say they work. And some of them are simple things, right? I'm not going to give you anything that shows you how to be an instant millionaire, but I'm going to give you some basics that really, hopefully, act as stable data when you feel like the fear is going to conquer you. You don't know if you should take that risk, take that step. But here we go. Okay, wait, what did she say? She said, trust my gut. She said, don't ask permission from anyone if you're going to do something you want to do. She said, sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. Let's reframe the conversation around failure. Just very simple things that you can kind of hold on to when you're really scared, because face it, we're all going to be scared. We're all going to have fear. And it's just, how do you go through it anyways?
That one ties in very brilliantly with one of my favorite rules from this book. But I think most likely resonates with our audience who have really a challenging time over that last year and a half. And though all of our sort of hills to climb may have looked a little bit different, so many of these common themes that we have in regards to how to prioritize or how to balance or how to kind of continue to find those wins, or accept that you can't win at everything. You can't be the perfect entrepreneur, the perfect parent, the perfect spouse, all at the same time, when all of a sudden we're trying to do all of those things, perhaps from the same seat in the same room of the house every single day. So I know that one of your rules, which was in the book, one of my favorites, is about the concept of life design. So one of the common questions that we receive, whether it's from members who are looking to advance their careers, and very commonly with conversations I have with members about their financial priorities, has to do with, how do I decide where to focus? Like, there are so many things I want to do, or so many things that I want to accomplish. Like, how do I balance it all? And I love your approach to that word, the idea of balance, and sort of kind of reframing that in a phrase that I love, which is life design, and the idea of designing your life, not necessarily in pursuit of balance, but to really be able to design your life in a way that allows you to do all of those things. So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit of insight with the audience today about how you look at your various priorities, how that may have challenged you over the last year during COVID, but how you use that concept of life design to really make sure that you're fulfilling yourself in all of those different avenues.
Yeah, for sure. So anytime someone throws the term balance on you, you can throw a glass of water on them and tell them I said from me. That term has been aimed predominantly at women. It is not something that is real or achievable, but let's also not forget it's never been real for men too. So when I say life design, it's you sitting down with your notebook. This is my handy dandy notebook, and saying, what do I want out of my life? How could I optimize my life to have more of the things that I want, whether it is a financial goal, a familial goal, more free time. And what you write down will not happen overnight. I just want to say that too, right? It might take 3-6 months. So during the pandemic, I'm sure along with everyone else, I was suddenly a homeschool teacher, a chef, a dishwasher, a maid. The first conversation was my husband and I, very late at night, setting almost like a map on the table, preparing for war. And we said, okay, what are you going to do? And what are you going to do? And okay, I'll divide this and you divide that. So we had very clear conversations of, if I'm cooking, you're cleaning. If I'm, we're each going to take 2 hours a day of homeschool. And if they don't get that Spanish lesson, screw it. I think we said, okay, they need to read and write and do math. And that's what we can focus on. That's where we can give the best of ourselves. I'd be lying to you if I said, I didn't have a nanny at that point in time. I did, and I was willing to take the risk of her commuting and me getting COVID than not having her at all, because we couldn't have done it without her. We had a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old who couldn't read, and a 9-year-old. No, he was 8. So we had her come, and I said it's worth the risk. Come 4 days a week instead of 5. You can go home on the weekends. And we found her friend who was out of work, and we paid her to drive her. So we put someone else in business. So I think that for us, it was like, okay, we're spending more money on our health, and we're risking our health, but that's what we need for our sanity at that time. And then when it came time to go, oh my gosh, this is not ending and school's gonna keep going remote, I said, we're moving to Florida. We're gonna plug into my parents' house. We're gonna send the kids to my elementary school. The schools did not shut down here. And then I can work. And suddenly I had 9 to 5 free every day. And so I could just be a machine where I was able to work and then also see my kids and not have that feeling of opposition that I was encountering with my children by being their teacher and the school warden. And it's going to be different for everybody, right? And so I think, why I talk about this book that I live by is I literally write the plans, and I know that they're not going to be achieved immediately. And I know that some people might not be able to afford, their caregiver or some of the things we did, but what are your non-negotiables? And they're going to change. If you are a mother, at least they change for me with every kid. I now know, because I've explored my boundaries, what I'm willing to do and not do, how long I'm willing to travel, how much I'm willing to sacrifice during a fashion week or whatever it is. And so I spent so much time, and I talk about this in the book, exploring my boundaries and knowing for me, not what any other mom is like or any other caregiver experiences, what am I good with and what am I not? And how do I begin to make a plan to take off my plate what I'm not? And be willing to know that sometimes it changes. I love cooking. I don't want to cook right now, So I'm like, Mom, you're going to make dinner. That's the deal. I'll go grocery shopping. I'll pay for all the groceries. You make dinner now and I'll clean up. So I think, again, it changes. And so the more you can just put down what you want and work towards that, knowing your priorities are going to shift. Does that answer it? Doesn't really answer the money question, but.
No, I think that is remarkably helpful, because one, it's an example of how unbelievably agile you're able to be, which undoubtedly needed to be the case for you to be as successful in all of these areas as you have. What I'm curious about, because this is kind of this beautiful case study as to how you were able to recognize your limits and identify how you were going to manage your life and your priorities with this shifting environment. What I'm really curious to hear about is, how did you feel? Did you know, were you confident that this was all going to work out, and that when you made these decisions about keeping your nanny or moving to Florida, that this was 100% the right choice? Did you feel fearless the whole time? Or are there times where, when it comes to making these types of decisions, maybe you question yourself, or you look back at a time where you didn't necessarily feel fearless?
Yeah.
And do you have any guidance for someone who may not have that same sense of confidence yet?
Yeah. So with regards to keeping my nanny, I knew that I was not scared about that. I made sure that we were taking the proper precautions. And obviously back in March of April of last year, no one knew what this thing was or how deadly. So we were incredibly cautious about how we went about doing it. And I felt like, you know what, I actually can't run a company that's on the brink of bankruptcy if I am doing the laundry and taking care of my 2-year-old all day. So that was a non-negotiable. So while I was a little bit alarmed at, could she bring COVID into the house? I was also like, let me look at the statistics. My husband and I do not fall into the risk categories, nor do our children, nor does she. So I'm willing to take that risk. I think as far as temporarily moving, it was a huge risk. It was not a costly one, but it meant that suddenly the head and the face of the brand is now living in another state. And so how do you design from remote? And the airplane became where I would spend a lot of my time commuting and making sure that I'm still one with the company. And so that was incredibly scary. Like, my team isn't leaving. Am I an asshole? Sorry for leaving. But I knew, again, in order to continue to do my job and make sure my company stayed afloat, that was a sacrifice that I was willing to make, and something that my company said, go if you got to go, and come back as often as you can. So, instead of a bus to work, I'm taking an airplane once a month, but I think it's worked out. And, most of my team has been able to stay remote. And so I think that it wasn't something I got to do that no one else did. And yeah, it's scary. And I think when I view something that makes me scared, I weigh the risk. What is the worst thing that could happen if I do this? Will I not be able to go to New York City for a photo shoot, or I'll miss that sample that has to get back into a box and shipped to my factory? And maybe it wasn't quite perfect. Yes, but Zoom has saved a lot of us. And so, I continue to lean on technology to help me sort out those things of not being there physically in person at those times.
That's really interesting, because it ties into some financial psychology that we challenge our members with on a pretty frequent basis. We do find from like a financial fear standpoint that exercise you just described in regards to testing yourself, like what's the worst case scenario, what's the worst thing that could happen, in many cases actually helps in our decision-making process, because we realize something may not actually be quite as scary as we had anticipated. So for all of us, when it comes to career decisions or financial decisions, using that trick, using that sort of psychological tool, ask yourself, what is the worst case scenario? What is the worst thing that could happen if I choose not to invest in this, or if I do invest in it, or if I take on this debt? And you may realize that the worst case scenario actually isn't that bad. So it can help us overcome some of those financial biases. Shifting a little bit from career to finances specifically, do you think that you can pinpoint a time or remember a time where maybe you didn't feel as fearless? Was there a tipping point for you, perhaps in your career or in your adult life, where you had transitioned to a point where you did feel a little more fearless than you had at one point? Or maybe just one example of a scenario you encountered where you really like recognize that emotion?
Yes. So when I started my company, obviously, as you had shared, I had $10,000 to my name. I had been fired from my job, and I was living on paying the bills via styling for commercials and TV, which did pay, $1,000 a day. So if I could get 1 to 2 of those jobs per month, then I was able to eat ramen and pay my rent. And so when my brother, who's my co-founder, said, he's like, how much do you need to make? We have all these orders coming in. How much do you need to make? And I would probably should have spoken to you, but I did a very exact calculation. I was like, well, my rent is this and food is this. And he's like, cool, $23,000 a year. Great. That's what you're going to live on. So if anyone's from New York City, you know how little $23,000 a year goes. And I couldn't eat, right? I hadn't factored in, taking the subway, like all these things. And so I lived that way for a very long time. You saw me in the magazines, you saw these celebrities carrying my stuff, and I would literally call Chase. I have the number seared into my brain because you couldn't go online to see if I had enough money to go out and eat. Or if I did go out and eat with friends and everyone did that, let's all split the bill, I'd be that person's like, I can't split the bill because I only had a water and a salad. And so even down to when I got married 5 years later, we had roommates, and it was constantly like, my father-in-law decided not to pay for our wedding dinner after we got married, and we didn't know that. And we were stuck with a $600 bill, and we didn't know how to pay it. I didn't have a credit card limit that went that high. And we're sitting outside being like, how do we pay this restaurant tonight? So you better believe that I've been there, and I've had that feeling of, how do I do this? And I think the first time that I experienced a little bit of freedom was when we were looking to buy a home. We had sold a small piece of the company, and I was able to take a little bit of money off the table, not a lot. And I said, I want to have a home. And I feel like that is the right investment for this part of my life. I have a 2-year-old. And so when we bought our first home, I'm sitting there remembering, how do I scam my roommate a year prior for like extra rent money I bought my first home and sold a little piece of my company to do that. That was a very fearless moment. And we bought in Brooklyn, and I was really anti living in Brooklyn, and it turned out to be an incredible investment for us. But then the other thing I think to add to it is I had a crazy ex-boyfriend, and he said, open up an account and forget the password and take whatever money you have, even if it's $5, put it in there every month. And I did that for 10 years, and I almost forgot about the account, but sometimes I would go in, and when I went to look at it, I was like, oh my gosh, we can now renovate this apartment. That's how much money is in there. So not that you should put your money in a low yield savings account that makes you no money, but I think the idea of that little bit that you just forget about that adds up to then pay for something that's truly meaningful is really worth it.
I love that. Yeah. I want to make sure everyone listens to this. Everyone I talk to, all of our members who are trying to figure out some of those, best tips for how to manage finances, living below your means, and, just getting in the habit of saving. So unbelievably important. So I love that real life example, because that's why we're so successful with things like our 401ks, where things happen automatically and you kind of forget about it. You don't check it all the time. So I'm so happy that worked out for you in a variety of ways. I'm very curious now, as you've described a few of these stories, if you can share a little bit more with us about how you and your partner manage money together. So it sounds like you've experienced a wide variety of scenarios in terms of what sort of financial endeavors you navigated together. Some very common events that we do and questions that we receive from couples are, what's the best guidance on how to merge finances, but also have financial discussions with someone that you're partnered with financially. So if you have any tips there, that would be great.
Yes. So when I first met my husband, just to put everything in perspective, he was my lottery ticket. He was a successful actor making 6 figures. It was me and an intern, and I wasn't making, barely anything. So I was like, I'm hitching my wagon to this guy. He's going to pay for my lifestyle. It's going to be great. And he watched my career and my company, from the beginning, from just me and an intern in a 5th floor walk up. And, when we got married and again, back to, we still had roommates, I said, this is what I'd like to do when we have kids. I'd like to have my money and your money, and we have a family account. It's a joint account where we each decide what we're going to put in. And that's what's used anytime we're family. And then I have my account. If I want to buy something, if I want to do something, that's mine. And so he was fine with that. And so that's how we've operated. As my company has grown and I've made, today, let's say the proportions are I make more income than he does. He still does great. I've proportionally added more to our family account, or I'll pay for the vacations because I happen to be making more right now. And so I think that those conversations are not easy, especially as a woman. They're hard to navigate. I usually am the one that gets more frustrated when we have these conversations than him, and he's not doing anything to frustrate me. I just get like, money, it's tense. And I want to say that the more we talk about it, the easier it gets. That would be my advice. It's uncomfortable. It can be challenging. And really, again, explore what you want. I have a friend who makes more than her husband, and they share everything, and she's scared to spend money because he'll get mad at her. And I say to her, but you're making more money. That's your money. That's not his call to tell you you can't go buy a pair of shoes or go on a vacation. And so, that's what she's agreed to. But really, again, what do you want? How do you want to share the load? Recognize if you make more, how you could be more helpful. And it doesn't mean that a man is less and all these stupid ideas we've been told. And I think the more you can talk about it, at times where it's not late at the end of the night, maybe after having too much wine, like go on a day date. We used to do that. We used to get out during the day. I'd block off 2 hours. We literally would go through our financial plan for the family. And then we said, okay, this is our nut for the month. This is where we want to set aside money to save and money for vacation and money for their college, and how do we budget this? And so to be able to do that without kids running around or bedtimes looming or being exhausted or having had a bad day, I think those would be my pieces of advice.
I like that. The idea of sort of building up that muscle, right? So we all have different financial personalities. We'll all have different emotions when it comes to having those conversations, whether we feel a little financially anxious or avoidant, or slightly obsessive, sometimes all three if possible. But the idea that if you continue to do it, it will start to feel a little bit more comfortable. And just the idea that you're being open and transparent about what you want is key. It's not that there's one correct way to do it. There are so many different scenarios that I've seen couples come up with over the years. And if you find something that works for you, that's fantastic. So just as reassurance to everyone else, you don't necessarily have to do it the way that your parents did it or the way that I do it or Rebecca does it. If you find something that works for you, fantastic. But you just always want to keep that dialogue open and make sure that you are sort of exercising those muscles on an ongoing basis, because things do change over time. Your goals will change over your time, your family, and most of your priorities will shift, and you always want to make sure that you're getting what you need and being vocal about what it is that you're prioritizing or where it is you want to go from here. So those are really helpful examples. And I do also very much appreciate that day date idea. I think too often people leave these types of serious conversations for whatever reason, for after dinner or right before bedtime, and just not a great time to be having a conversation about something like family finances, in my opinion.
I also think that an extraordinary woman that I interviewed on my podcast said, Patty Seller, she said, if women talked about money with each other the way they talk about sex and children, how much more fluent, well-versed, and educated would we be? If the 117 women here today said, what are you investing in? How are you saving? How much money do you make? How much are you putting away? Oh my gosh, and those conversations we're having, so the next time you're at a party or you're with your girlfriends getting your nails done, or you're, having a rosé all day, what do you make? How much are you saving? What have you invested in? Did it get a good return? I think these are conversations that are uncomfortable. And I'm trying to pinpoint, when was I taught that I shouldn't know this or talk about this? And I can't, but we have to begin to talk about this stuff, because we will only become more literate the more we talk about it.
Thank you for that endorsement. I have always very much been an advocate for normalizing this conversation. I agree. I don't remember exactly when I personally learned or when it was kind of ingrained in us that the finances were not something that you talked about at the dinner table or in mixed company. But I would really love to see that change. And this actually ties in perfectly. One of our attendees had just asked a question for you. I was going to hold all of these to the end, but it's just so timely. Someone had asked for your best resources for learning how to be financially stable, but in general, wondering, I know that on your podcast, you interview a lot of fascinating women, but aside from anything you may have already mentioned, do you have any favorite resources or recommendations for how people who are listening today might be able to either educate themselves or further that dialogue with their networks?
Yes. So aside from speaking to you, 1-800-LAUREN and the team at SoFi, I'm going to admit I'm not perfect. I recently opened up a Robinhood account, not because I thought I was going to make zillions of dollars, but I wanted to teach myself how to invest and what to look for in the stock market, so that I'm not depending on a gentleman who manages, my stocks, when he talks to me and he spews a bunch of data at me, and I'm like, please talk to me like I'm two. because I don't understand this or anything you just said. So I said, you know what, I'm willing to lose $2,000. I'm going to invest and play the market with $2,000 and see what happens. Turns out I have a lot to learn. But I think, diving in, getting your toe in. I think Rachel Rogers, again, I mentioned her, wrote a book, We Should All Be Millionaires. She's an incredible resource. She just launched a book. So for $25, you can learn how to reshape and rethink your finances and how you make more. I think I read a lot of business at, Forbes, Fast Company, Inc. You might not learn exactly what to invest in or how to do that, but you'll learn a lot about what smart business people do and how they succeed. So I think that is the quest that I'm on right now, is getting just more financially literate, because I think that we need to be. And, if you do have a windfall, you should be smart about what happens to that cash when you have it.
Yeah, I agree with all of those resources, all incredibly credible resources for everyone to pursue. And as much as I love the idea of everyone calling me directly, as a reminder for anyone who's joining us today, SoFi is here to help you get your money right. So in addition to these live events, myself and my team, we're available on a complimentary basis to SoFi members. So if you haven't taken the opportunity to speak with me or another financial planner one-on-one, you're always welcome to schedule a complimentary call. If you're looking for more guidance in your career, schedule a session with a Korn Ferry advisor on how to really accelerate your career. Whatever it is that you're looking to do, we want to help you. We want to help you get your money right so that you can realize your ambition, so that you can feel fearless and go after the things that are really important to you. I'm curious because I want to take more questions from our audience, and I know that Molly's keeping track of that. So if you haven't asked your questions in the chat yet, please put those in there now. But before I exclusively get to our audience questions, Rebecca, I'm curious if one of the rules in your book, if you have a favorite or anyone in particular that you wanted to mention to the audience today.
Yes. One of the chapters is get friendly with failure. Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. I think that women can be very scared to take risks. They weigh the consequences. I talk about a risk I took in that chapter where I said, what is the worst thing that could happen? And it was a scenario where my bank, who lends us capital in advance, it's a specific type of lender specific to the fashion industry. So they collect the payment from the department stores, but they advance us the cash. And so if they cut off the cash, we don't have any money. There's no other account it goes into. And they said, that's it. We're done. We've loaned you money past the point that we're comfortable because we don't have the inventory that adds up to it. And this is not our job to do. And I was like, cool. Okay. What is the worst that could happen if we go out of business? Not that I want to go out of business, but they'll take my home because they have a lien on it. They'll take my company and all the things. We won't have one. All these people will be out of work. And this was many years ago, probably 6 years ago at this point. And I was like, oh, wait, they can't take my husband or my kids. They cannot auction them off anywhere. And so I really just decided, what is worst case scenario? And can I tolerate that? Would it be hard? Would I be crying? Would I be a hot mess? Yes. And so I think if you can view the risks as, again, what's the worst that could happen? What can you afford to lose? I said to myself, I can afford to lose $2,000 in Robinhood from poor investing. Then you know that you've learned something. I now know what I've learned from losing that money, right? And so I think that that's, anytime you can learn something, that's a tool in your toolbox to be that much more successful. So let's reframe failure. The idea that we should now go into a shame hole and we're nothing. Don't listen to that voice. It'll grow if you give it attention, just like children, if you run to them and pepper them with sympathy every time they cry, they're going to love that feeling and ask for it a lot more. And so how do you sort of say, okay, good, I'm not paying attention to that voice and I'm going to just keep plowing on and going through and learning something.
While you were talking, I immediately started thinking about something else that you had mentioned in the book. So for those who in the audience today, I shared with Rebecca right before this session that I am a first-time expectant mother. And there was some guidance in this book about, as we talked about earlier, some life design and sort of that concept of balance being an unfairly used word. But one of the other things that had resonated with me as I was reading about your like concept of life design was recognizing when you feel guilty and sort of allowing yourself to recognize when that happens, but also realize that you can't necessarily let that drive you. We are in so many ways susceptible to guilting ourselves when we shouldn't necessarily be. So I saw a few questions in the chat that had to do with kind of making priorities and how to cope with those from an emotional standpoint. So is there any sort of guidance or permission perhaps that you will give to people in the audience who are putting this perhaps unnecessary pressure on themselves to do something perfect or to always get the win, or are guilting themselves into some type of behavior or activity, whether it's career minded, financially minded, or otherwise?
Yeah, I feel like I lost my war with trying not to feel guilty about 3 years ago. I'm gonna feel guilty. I can only speak as a woman. I'm sure that emotion is hardwired into us as keepers. The last 10,000 years of evolution of raising family and keeping people safe and being nurturing. I'm sure those two things are somewhat tied in. So I can't give you any magic solutions to not feel guilty. But what I will say is, I reached a point where I said, if I give into this emotion again, I'm just going to be a miserable person. I was paid and flown out along with my family to speak at an event in a beautiful location where my kids were so happy. And when I was with them, I felt guilty for not working. And when I was working, I felt guilty for not being with them. And I'm like, but the whole reason we're here and the whole reason they get to have all this fun is because I'm here to speak. And so I just realized I'm never going to win that emotion or whatever that was that doesn't even make sense. I'm not going to win that fight. So I still sometimes the last, 2 weeks of my life have been consumed with this book launch. And I keep saying, I'm sorry, honey. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He's like, stop saying sorry. Your children are watching you do something. They're watching you birth a book into the world. And so if you're working late hours and you're not fully present right now, they'll know when they're older what you went through. And so I think we just have to, I'm trying to take a note from my husband, stop saying sorry. And realize that there's going to be times when you are all in on something like I just have been, and then you'll come out of it and then you can go pay more attention to your kids or whatever it is you love to do. But I haven't beaten that emotion. I just try not to listen to it as much. I try to be aware when I'm feeling that way and go like, does this make sense? And what can I do to change it, rather than just, the idea of feeling something is sitting back and experiencing it. But if anything I can do to combat that or say, good, emotion noted, keep going, I think is helpful. So try not to do it, but I'm a hypocrite because I feel guilty a lot.
No, I think that's brilliant, right? Because you're not trying to conquer it. You're not trying to ignore it. You recognize it and you manage it, right? So the idea isn't that if you fall, like if you allow yourself to feel it, that you've failed.
Yeah.
So I think that is very, very important. It's not a victory to ignore those feelings or to somehow program yourself to not have it. It's identifying it and then finding a way to manage your life and sort of move on in a very
Yeah. And I think that because this podcast is fresh in my mind with Rachel, she was like, women have been raised to skimp and save and put everything away and sacrifice ourselves in order to have money one day, but we've spent our life not enjoying anything to then maybe have a retirement. And men are like, I'm going to buy the car, I'm going to buy the watch, I'm going to save, and I'm going to get a raise. And she said, since when is feeling guilty about enjoying your life now the trade-off to, well, you're never going to save anything? And so what I love about her approach in her book is like, no, I'm going to buy the shoes and not feel guilty. I'm going to go on that vacation and not feel guilty. And I'm going to save some money and I'm going to invest. And again, it doesn't happen right away. And you got to work yourself up to how that happens. But we don't need to feel this guilt from a perspective of we're not worth it. And it's sacrifice all to have something later and spend your life, being miserable about it.
I'm glad you mentioned invest in there. One of the questions that we got from the audience had to do with some of your financial tips, specifically for women. You had mentioned earlier on the idea of just tucking money away into an account that you kind of forget about. So sort of the idea of this automated savings. And you talked a little bit about kind of like trying your hand at speculative investing. So SoFi has an active investment account platform where anyone can buy or sell or trade in individual stocks or ETFs, fractional shares. Any other sort of high level guidance for our audience in regards to financial tips, that either things that went really well for you, things you wish you knew that you were when you were younger, or maybe things to avoid?
When I was younger, and again, I'm sure this audience has passed this point, but again, knowing my salary and how much I was making, I went into a lot of debt. I was constantly overdrafting and opening up new bank accounts with different banks so I could cash that check and not have to deal with the overdraft. I had years of bad credit that hurt us when we were grown adults and trying to do things that grown adults do because I could never pay my credit cards on time. So I would say that, don't get a credit card unless you can pay it off. I know that's, 101, but that really rings true for me because my limit was $500 and I ruined my credit for 7 years because I couldn't pay $500. And then I would say it's hard right now because interest rates are so low. So it's hard to make money on your money. So for us personally, putting everything we had into this house was, for us at the time, the best investment we could ever ask for. And yes, we didn't make money on it, but we sold it and then we made a lot of money 7 or 8 years later. So I think that, sometimes what seems like the sensible thing to do, just do your research, and lean on the team at SoFi to help guide you in where you spend this money because things change. 2 weeks ago, I would have said buy some Bitcoin, but I'm not telling one to do that now.
Excellent. Well, I do appreciate you sharing so much information and guidance with our audience. As a reminder to everyone, as you look towards resources and things that can provide you with personalized advice, myself and my team, the financial planning team here at SoFi, are available to you. You can feel free to schedule a complimentary one-on-one call with one of us. We also have our amazing partnership with Korn Ferry Advance. If you're looking for any type of career coaching, you're welcome to schedule a session with one of them. And as a reminder, everyone who joined us today will soon have one of these, which is amazing and has an abundance of career advice, of life advice, of entrepreneurial advice that I believe will help everyone in their journey as well. So I know we are a little bit over time, but I appreciate all of you joining us today. It was absolutely my pleasure. Rebecca, congratulations on the book. I really enjoyed it. And I can't wait for the rest of our audience to have had the opportunity to read it as well. And hopefully we will connect again, maybe in a year or so, and you can give us all of the amazing updates about what's happening in your life, maybe a return to New York.
Yeah, we're returning.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. We really loved it. And you can tell our audience really enjoyed themselves. So thank you very, very much. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the summer.
Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And as an author, leaving me a review is the best thing you can do. So please leave me a review on Amazon or Goodreads, what you thought. And then I would love to hear your story. I just got an incredible email from a teacher who took a promotion to be a principal. And she said, I read your book. I quit my job. I want to go back to being a teacher. Thank you for writing this book. So I want to hear your fearless moments. It makes me so happy. You can either use the hashtag or DM me on Instagram, but I want to hear if this book helped or changed your life in some way and what steps you took, because it makes me smile from ear to ear when I see women taking risks. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us. We will see you again next time. Take care.